Welcome to the Fade 5 here on YouTube. Ben Wittenstein with you and Nate Jacobson next to me. Nate, we are recording just slightly a bit early this week, a day or two early because A, we got Thanksgiving. B, we got things to do this weekend. And C, there's just too many fun games that we couldn't wait. We just had to get it all out right now.
Yeah, it kind of works out well because I already have a lot of bets for this weekend. So instead of waiting for the market to mature, I was just kind of firing early this week and wanted to get a lot of bets out of the way before the Thanksgiving holiday. And it made sense just to record early before the second, or I don't even know what number it is. I think maybe the fourth. It's before this latest college football playoff rankings, which could be fascinating tonight, although maybe a little less fascinating with all the SEC teams losing. To see kind of where Indiana slots into the rankings after their first loss of the season, but they should be fine. Probably won't be hosting a playoff game, but I feel like the Hoosiers will be in the playoff as long as they take care of Purdue, which they should. And we're recording a little bit earlier, but have still plenty to talk about because a lot of volume this week already early in the week. Feels kind of like the summer when you're betting all summer and it's like 5 days before the games are being played and you have a full card.
We were talking about like what our bets were going to be for this weekend. A couple days ago, we were talking about this and you sent me a screenshot. You had already 6-7 bets that were lined up after like Sunday.
Yeah. Going into week 13, I actually had 2 bets because a couple sports books posted look ahead lines and a few of those teams were either on bye or were playing FCS schools. So figured I wasn't going to lose much betting them now. And then I bet a lot on Sunday or Saturday night and Sunday as those lines kind of trickled out, just kind of knowing that there's all these situations kind of already built in. And I wanted to get ahead of a few numbers that I thought would move in a certain direction once some of these scenarios and situations became more known to the public.
All right, well, let's start out then with this week, some of our favorite plus money bets as we open the doors, put the key in, turn on the plus bus, get that thing started, Nate. We're going to go favorite plus 100 bet. We'll start with you. What do you like?
Yeah, so I like South Carolina here. A big game against Clemson. Big in-state rivalry that we see always at the end of the season. Last week, the regular season. This year, it's week 14 because there's 2 byes this year. And this is actually one of the bets I placed early last week on the look ahead because both teams are playing FCS schools. I know one was playing Wofford, forgot which one, and I don't even remember which one South Carolina played, but those games didn't matter. All the focus is on this week. And South Carolina, they have 3 losses this year, but there was a close loss to LSU, close loss to Alabama. They lost to Ole Miss, but I feel like they're trending in the right direction right now. They had a couple big home wins against Texas A&M, Missouri. They're actually like a weird case where like if everyone loses this week or multiple teams lose this week, South Carolina with a win could kind of sneak up and maybe take one of the last at-large spots in the 12-team playoff. Meanwhile, Clemson, they only have 2 losses. They're actually still alive to make the playoff through winning the ACC. If Miami loses to Syracuse, Clemson, who's already in the clubhouse in terms of ACC play, could get a trip to Charlotte and play SMU next week if Miami loses, which is possible because Miami, pretty vulnerable team, especially defensively, and Syracuse, a game where a lot of ACC teams have had trouble with in the past in the Carrier Dome up there in Western New York or upstate New York. So, yeah, Clemson might be thinking about that game, but they have a really big game in terms of in-state bragging rights. But I do like South Carolina team here. The team that's trending in the right direction, in my opinion, have a really good defensive line that I think could cause some trouble to Cade Klubnik and this Clemson offensive line that Clemson, they haven't really beat anyone this year that impresses me. And they're 2 kind of like big games where they were getting a lot of hype. Against Georgia, they lost, and then that Louisville game when they were a big favorite, their second loss of the season, and maybe the one that's going to doom them. So, yeah, I'm kind of down on Clemson, who even a few weeks ago when they played Pitt, just wasn't an impressive performance against Pitt's backup quarterback. So I like the South Carolina team trending in the right direction to pull off the outright upset on the road.
I like it. I think I'm going to place this bet as well this week. I mean, it's like plus 2.5, I think, on the spread. So you just might as well hit the money line at this point. Get a little bit of extra value on that for a team that's really motivated to win this game.
Yeah, you won't need the points, in my opinion. That's why it's the plus bus and why I have them winning. But I do have some South Carolina plus the points from last week.
All right, Nate Lowe, let's pick up another team on our route here on the Plus Bus. We'll go to Cincinnati. I'm going to take the Cincinnati Bearcats on the money line at plus 140. They're at home against TCU. And this is one of those games that we talked about where you have a team that's 5-6. They're looking for a bowl game berth. They're looking for that sixth win. They're playing a team that's already in 7-4. TCU, they've made a bowl. They're good in the bowl front, and I think Cincinnati's going to be very motivated here to get a win. I'm a little surprised on the spread. They're plus 3.5. I think this is a good team. They've just had an ounce of bad luck over the last couple games. 3 of their last 4 games have been on the road. Of those 4 games, 3 of them have come against teams that now have 8 or more wins. They were just kind of set up to have a very tough schedule towards the end of their season. And I think now they're back at home. They play a TCU team that is vulnerable. TCU is good. There's no doubt about that. But I think they're vulnerable, especially on the defensive side. I think we might see Cincy try to run the ball a little bit more, dominate that time of possession, keep the ball out of the hands of that TCU offense, which can be a bit deadly. And if Cincy does go to that run game, they might actually find some luck because the TCU defense is not very good defending the run. They're 88th in rush defense success rate. So maybe you get twofold. Cincy trying to keep maintain possession as long as they can, run the ball on a bad run defense, get some points. It's a night game at home. It's a 6 o'clock local start. It's going to be lights on, lights are bright. Fans are going to be rowdy on a Saturday night. I think Cincy can get the job done at plus 140. To me, I really like that value. I'm going to take the Bearcats. Let's go.
Yeah, I was looking at the 5 and 6 teams this season, and I know Cincinnati fell under that bucket in terms of trying to get bowl eligibility. And it made me think, I don't think I've watched or like paid attention to a TCU game this year, or even like considered betting on or against them since that week 1 game on a Friday night against Stanford, which feels like so long ago. Like TCU exists, but they've just been like a very insignificant team for me following in the Big 12. Maybe I was on UCF like in week 3 or something against TCU, and UCF had a big rally before their season went off the tracks. But yeah, I just feel like I haven't been paying attention to Sonny Tyke's team at Texas Christian, which is the complete opposite what it was 2 years ago. And like every week I was betting against them when they were just luck boxing their way to the college football playoff.
Yeah, and I think we could see Brendan Sorsby on the Cincinnati side really take advantage of that TCU defense at points as well. We've seen them be shaky at times. So this is as good of a chance as any for Cincy to take advantage of a nighttime home game against maybe a shaky defense, bounce back situation after playing some really good teams over the last couple games. This is only going to be their 3rd home game since October 19th, which is nuts to me. They've only had 2 home games since Halloween. So maybe they take advantage of that with the night game. The classic rowdy Cincinnati crowd coming into play, Nate.
They beat at historic Nippert Stadium. They beat Arizona State, and that win has aged really nicely. Although Arizona State was without quarterback Sam Levitt that game.
Yes. All right, let's go to our number 5 play of the week as we get into our top 5 here on the Fade 5.
Number 5.
Yeah, and probably one of the bigger games of the week in terms of name brands and also just significance for the college football playoff. And it's Notre Dame going to USC. And I like the Trojans here, catching 7.5. And I know Notre Dame has been really impressive outside that week 2 loss to Northern Illinois, but I have some serious questions on who they've played this season. If you look a little bit closer at their schedule, they did beat Texas A&M in week 1, which makes that week 2 loss to NIU just really confusing what happened. But let's just call that a wash and kind of look on from week 3 for Notre Dame, which is, I mean, they've been really good. They're undefeated since then. But they beat Purdue, and actually they were like closed like a 7-point favorite in West Lafayette. But now we know Purdue is one of the worst teams in the Power 4, so not a significant win there. They beat Miami of Ohio. Their closest game so far this year was against Louisville, and they won 31-24. It was the last week of September. I guess that's an impressive win, but Louisville also hasn't been really good this year's season. They lost to Stanford a few weeks ago, and Notre Dame actually did beat Stanford. I'm just kind of going down the list of who Notre Dame's played. They beat Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech was out starting quarterback Haynes King. They beat Navy, they beat Florida State, they beat Virginia, they beat Army, and a lot of people might point to the Navy and Army wins as impressive because they were ranked at the time and undefeated, but Army and Navy are teams that need to be playing in like neutral game states or at least with a lead, and Notre Dame took advantage early on, got out to big leads, and those run-first teams really had no chance against the Fighting Irish. So this USC team for this week, definitely the best pass offense that Notre Dame has faced since the Louisville game when Louisville was able to throw on them. It'll also be Notre Dame's toughest test in terms of their defense without their star cornerback, Benjamin Morrison, who is a projected first-round pick cornerback, and he's been out since October with a season-ending hip injury. So I think USC can have some success in the air. You look at the other side, and USC, they're 6-5, but all 5 losses have been by 7 points or less. A lot of those games were being played in the Eastern or Central time zone. So I think the first year of the Big Ten and all that travel has kind of been hard on USC and the kind of the grind and the physicality of what the Big Ten has to offer. So I think you can make a case that Notre Dame is overvalued because of their schedule, but you could also make a case that USC has been unlucky this season. So I kind of like the Trojans here catching 7.5. I think there's a lot of inflation in towards Notre Dame's favor because of their standing in the rankings and in terms of the playoff, where all they need to do is win, and they probably host a playoff game and definitely make the playoff. So don't see them really covering this game because I think USC a little bit unlucky this season. If some of those losses were wins and they were like a 8-3 team going into this game, the spread would be a lot lower. So like the Trojans plus 7.5 here on Saturday afternoon.
How do you feel about an overplay in this game?
Yeah, so one of the worries I had about backing USC just in general was they're probably playing their second best quarterback. Miller Moss was benched after the Washington loss a few weeks ago, and then they had a bye, and they went on to Jaden Maeva, who's a UNLV transfer. And he hasn't been great this season, and that's kind of what would hold me back from maybe USC scoring a lot of points here. I do think Lincoln Riley can get the most out of any quarterback that he has, and we've seen it in the past. And maybe there's actually some room for USC's offense to be a little better. I watched their game against UCLA late on Saturday night, and they kicked like 3 really short field goals from like within 23 yards in the first half. So maybe if they have a little bit more success in the red zone, they can score on Notre Dame. And Notre Dame on the other side, Riley Leonard's had a pretty solid season, and USC's defense, while they're definitely improved from last year, it's still not a great unit by any stretch. So yeah, I don't really have an opinion on the total here because I think Notre Dame just kind of try to take care of business, win the game, stay healthy, be idle next week, and then find out where they're going to play or who they're going to play in the college football playoff. So just like kind of like the USC side here, because I think there's a lot of upside with USC where if they get a few breaks, they score in the red zone, touchdowns instead of field goals, they'll have a chance to stay within the number in this game.
Yeah, I keep going back to the whole travel issue that you brought up at the start of that, where it's just like they're at home now 2 weeks in a row, sleep in their own beds, don't have to worry about huge cross country flight. They don't have to worry about being on a plane for 5 hours and playing a 3-hour football game. It makes a big difference, both mentally and physically, for a team like this that is just getting used to these travel issues and travel scheduling in the Big Ten.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, their losses, I think I mentioned, it was Michigan, Maryland, and Minnesota. All games they were pretty much like, it looked like they were certainly going to win against Maryland. The Minnesota game was a toss-up. Against Michigan, they have a late lead, and then they let up an explosive run because that game, Michigan was not able to pass the ball at all. That's back when Alex Orji was their starting quarterback. So yeah, I just feel like USC, they're just losing all these coin flip games, but no one's getting margin in terms of beating them. And in order for Notre Dame to cover this number, they're going to have to get margin. And I do still really have some questions about who Notre Dame has played this season. And are they just running up the score on bad teams, or are they actually this good? So kind of just fascinated really to see what Notre Dame is going into the college football playoff, because I feel like they haven't been truly tested since week 1 against A&M, or even maybe that week 5 game against Louisville.
I like it. All right, let's move on to our next one.
Number 4.
Now, Nate, there's small doors, there's big doors, there's medium-sized doors, there's dog doors, there's car doors, there's barn doors, but I wanted to talk about the Commodores of Vanderbilt. Plus 11.5. We're going to take them on the spread against Tennessee this weekend. At home, playing Vanderbilt, I think they're a much better team at home. First of all, they cover the spread a lot more often than they don't, especially on the road. But to me, this is just a crazy number for Vanderbilt, which has shown they can cover double-digit spreads. They are 6-0 this season when they are double-digit underdogs. Their offense, I think, is good enough to stay with Tennessee. We know Tennessee's offense has struggled at times. They, at times, look really good. At times, they look like they can't even convert any third down or fourth down conversion that they try. So, to me, Vandy has been semi-consistent in terms of betting them and covering these spreads. They've also had an impressive last 4 games on their schedule. Texas, they go to Auburn, they go to LSU. Those are really tough games, and they managed to cover in 3 out of those 4 games. that they played. So to me, I think Vanderbilt's the right side here. I'm going to trust their offense. I'm going to trust what we have seen from the Commodores all season long, which is them just covering these large numbers when the market doesn't seem to believe in them, when they're playing these good teams. It's just a team with a strong heart. They play hard, they play aggressive, they do all of those buzzwordy things. But whatever they do it right because they cover these games. So I'll take Vandy plus 11.5 against Tennessee. They're playing at home. It's a good environment for them where they've done well this season. I like the number. I think we're gonna ride with the Commodores.
Yeah, and this just missed my cut as a potential bet for me. I actually did bet this. Took Vandy plus the points on, I believe, Sunday. And for me, it's liking Vanderbilt as like a pesky underdog with Diego Pavia as quarterback. But at the same time, Tennessee, I really have some serious questions about them. I mean, others in Alabama, they don't have a really good win on their schedule. They beat Florida, but that game was in overtime before Florida's kind of had this resurgence. Yeah, I don't think Tennessee's that great. I feel like they're a team that could get exposed in the playoff if the matchup it goes wrong for them. Their offense just has been very underwhelming, and it's been their defense that's kind of carried them to this 9-2 season. And I wouldn't be shocked if Vandy pulled up the outright upset and there was a lot more chaos in terms of which SEC teams are actually going to make the playoff by the time we get to the final selection show.
I like it. All right, we'll go to you for our number three.
Number three.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest game of the weekend. It's a lot at stake, and it's awesome that we're having this game because we haven't seen it since 2011, which was when Texas A&M left the Big 12 for the SEC, and Texas has had some sour grapes because of that, and they never wanted to reschedule like a non-conference. So now we're just back in both teams back in the same conference in the SEC, and they're playing on a Saturday night in College Station. So, I mean, just that alone is really exciting to have this game back in our lives. But the fact that because of everything that happened last week, its winner goes to Atlanta to play Georgia in the SEC championship, and loser does not. If Texas loses, I still think they probably make the playoff. If Texas A&M loses, they don't make the playoff. The only way they make the playoff, I believe, is if they win the SEC. I think even if they lose the SEC championship, they wouldn't make it. But still, it's just so much fun that we have this game. And it's two teams that I feel like I have a lot of questions about. And last week I was against Texas A&M on the show, wrote an article about it, how I liked it, Auburn on the money line against A&M. But I also mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it on this show, but I definitely mentioned the article that my plan was bet against Texas A&M when they go to Auburn the week before playing Texas, and then bet on Texas A&M against Texas. And I still have some serious doubts about Texas. I know they're 10-1, but if you look at their schedule, just not that impressive who they beat. I know they won at Michigan, but that win doesn't look as good because Michigan has not a lot of talent on offense and are poorly coached on defense. They beat Oklahoma. Sure, Oklahoma had that upset against Alabama, but Oklahoma has been highly disappointing this season, and that's not an impressive win in my opinion. I mean, you could say they beat Florida a few weeks ago, but that was Florida's third-string quarterback. Lagway was hurt. Also, Florida was just off the Georgia game where they kind of put in a full effort there, and probably were just kind of focused in on those LSU and Ole Miss games, which they ended up winning. So just Texas, their one big game where they could make a statement this year against Georgia, they completely failed, losing 30-15. And Georgia's offense wasn't even good that game. It was that just Texas's offense with Quinn Ewers was that bad. And Quinn Ewers has an ankle injury going into this game. And I know he's going to play, but if he's not 100%, there's going to be some faithful, some Longhorns faithful in that 12th man in College Station, maybe calling for Arch Manning. And I don't know if Sarkisian's going to put Arch Manning in this spot, but regardless, I don't think Arch would do well against a Mike Elko defense on the road. On the other side, I know I was against A&M last week, but I was really impressed with how they overcame a 21-0 early deficit against Auburn to get back into that game, actually have a lead in the final minutes before Auburn kicked a field goal before it went into 4 overtime. So I was actually a little bit more impressed with A&M despite losing than maybe I would have expected when, especially the first, 25 minutes was a complete disaster for the Aggies. But now they're back at home. Marcel Reed, I think he can do some damage in the quarterback run game against Texas defense and just at least give that dynamic where he could have some success on the ground and then also keep Texas guessing and maybe hit some passes. So yeah, I like Texas A&M here catching the points. in a game with all this much at stake, and in a rivalry, always kind of looking towards the underdog anyway, but also just a way to bet against Texas, which is something we haven't been able to do much the last few weeks because the teams that they've been playing have been so bad. But here we have a very motivated, obviously, Texas A&M team that really wants to get to the SC championship game and knock off their rival. So like Texas A&M, you can try to get a +6 or better. I know it's 5.5 right now as we record on a Tuesday, but we'll have it as 5.5 right now, but I don't think you're going to need the points. I think the Aggies win on Saturday night.
Woo! I might do that. I might take a little Aggie money line there. I'm more than happy to fade Texas in the situation they're in, and for the reason you mentioned, where it's just like, are we going to get a good Texas team to show up in a big game like this against a legitimately good football team? They have to win by more than a touchdown. We sure about that one from Texas? I don't know about that one, so I like it. I might do money line for that game. Let's go to number 2.
Number 2.
I'm going to turn my attention to the cornfields of Iowa, Nate, where the Iowa Hawkeyes seem to love playing at home. And you can look at their home road splits, and it's kind of nuts. Iowa at home is a powerhouse. Iowa on the road is mid-tier. They average 35 points per game at home. They rush for more yards at home. They pass for more yards at home. Their defense plays better at home. Whatever it is, they love playing at home. They love playing in Iowa City. And that's why I like their team total over 22.5. I think they're going to get the job done against Nebraska. Against the Nebraska defense, which, by the way, gives up on average 22.2 points per game this season. I think they'll be able to take advantage with the run game. Their running offense at home is unbelievable. They outrush almost every single one of their opponents at home. Nebraska's defense on the run game is outside of the top 50 in defensive success rate against the rush. I think we see an Iowa team that's finally back home after a couple rough games here and there. They've been on the road in like more than half of their last 4 or 5 games. So I think they come home, their offense shows up, they play a good game. Over 22.5, it just seems like a short number against the Nebraska defense, which to me hasn't shown anything impressive. Iowa scored more points against better defenses this season. So 23, I mean, Iowa could score 30. And I've said that before on this podcast that Iowa can score 30, and they've done it. They've gotten 3 or 4 games. They've gotten the game total over by themselves in scoring. So the market seemingly can't figure out this Iowa team, at least offensively, but they're back at home. Give me over 22.5. I really like this number. I would take it all the way up to 23.5, to be honest, if it goes that high.
Yeah, I think Iowa in some form is definitely the side here, especially because Nebraska, they're off the storm the field win after clinching their first bowl berth since 2016. So, I mean, I'm sure they're still going to want to win. It's a rivalry game. They lost last year at home against Iowa in a game I remember having a best bet in a show that we used to be part of. But I think Iowa does well here. Look at their quarterback situation, though, before maybe placing this bet, because I know Sullivan's out for the year. McNamara hasn't played, and I don't really know if he's going to play this game. So they have their third string guy, but they were able to run on Maryland last week. So maybe Nebraska is a little bit drunk still from that storm the field win last week against Wisconsin. So
I mean, they got 29 against Maryland, and Maryland's defense is not as good as Nebraska's, but now Iowa's going to be back at home. To me, it kind of evens out there in terms of getting points, whatever it is. So I will happily take the Iowa team total. A number and a team, honestly, that whenever I bet the over in a game they're a part of, it hasn't steered me wrong this season more often than not. Let's go to our number 1 play.
Number 1.
We have a joint play this time. A little group ride action, Nate, if you want to introduce it for the people.
Yeah, let's take Wisconsin on the money line. We're going early Friday, so noon Eastern time, Friday, Big Ten game, Big Ten rivalry, Minnesota, Wisconsin. And I've been on Minnesota a lot this year, but I think this is the time to get off them and back the Badgers, a team who actually have been mostly against all year. But right now they're sitting at 5-6, so they need to win this game to get bowl eligible. And I think nowadays in college football, it's not it used to be where you bet on every team who was 5-6 because a bowl game meant a lot. It meant a lot for the coaches, so they get the extra bowl practices. It meant a lot for the players, so they kind of have a vacation to end the year. But now with how college football is going and players opting out and transferring, maybe it's not important. But I do think this is an important game for Luke Fickell He's finishing up his second year at Wisconsin. Things haven't gone as planned for him since he left Cincinnati for the job in Madison. He just fired his offensive coordinator, Phil Longo, before the Nebraska game last week. So it'll be the second game with a different OC. I do think he really wants a positive to end the season going into year 3, where, I mean, if they don't win this game, there might, even if they win this game, there could be a little bit of pressure on Fickell going into year 3 to kind of turn it around. They did have a hard schedule this year, so I think he deserves definitely a couple more years, but I do think he kind of just needs a positive, and beating a rival at home to get bowl eligible, I think, is just something he needs. It's also a good spot to fade Minnesota. They kind of put everything into that 1-point loss to Penn State. They really emptied the tank. I mean, they were running trick plays. They were doing everything they could to try to knock off Penn State at home. They fell short by 1 point, and now they're traveling on a short week, and Minnesota's already bowl eligible, so they don't have that motivation on their side. So I like the Badgers. I do think Fickell really needs to get that 6th win, and the fact that we could lay just a modest money line price of -130 is what I like. I was kind of worried this line would be like -3, and it'd be a little bit tougher. I don't know if I want to lay points with Wisconsin to win by 4 or more, but just the money line, win the game. Wouldn't be shocked if the Badgers won by 1 or 2 points, but we'd cash a ticket on that money line bet.
Yeah, I was really happy when I saw -130 because a lot of the reasons why you mentioned Wisconsin at home, and you seeing them in a situation where they're a short favorite at home. And I know this year they've been wishy-washy at points, but again, you're getting a Wisco team at home off 4 straight losses. You're probably getting them at a pretty good number again in a rivalry game. To me, and Minnesota's going to be, sometimes when teams play these really good teams like Penn State, or we see it when they play Ohio State, Oregon, a lot of these powerhouse teams the week after, they're just drained. And now they have to go on the road, short week. Like, all of these numbers and situations are working against Minnesota. And to get Wisconsin at still -130 on the money line, I love it. And when you mentioned it in our little betting group chat, I was like, that is a really good bet. So I think as long as it stays under 130 or under, I'm always going to be hitting Wisconsin in a situation like this.
Yeah, I don't think Wisconsin's a great team, but the teams that they lost to were all really good teams, at least at the time, where their home losses were Alabama, Oregon, and Penn State. So not a pretty hard home schedule this year. And then their other 3 losses at USC when USC was kind of rolling, and then at Iowa and at Nebraska, which are tough trips. And Nebraska obviously was super motivated last week to try to get bowl eligible after losing so many games where they had a chance to win the 6th win. So that was a big game that they knew they had to win to try not to save it to the last season when they had to go to Iowa. And I think Wisconsin was still trying to figure stuff out with a new offensive coordinator. I think they get the job done here back at home, in a more comfortable environment against a team that's a little bit of a step down in class than some of the losses that they've had this season.
All right, it's one of our favorite points of the show. Bonus time. It's time for bonus bets. We get the hands going. Nate, we'll go right back to you for our first bonus time bet. This is, congratulations, 3 straight weeks Boston College. You've gotten off the Boston College train. You're back on a different team this week.
I do, and they came through for me last week, and they got Mack Brown fired. So
they did.
What a run for Bill O'Brien's team. I feel like they've been them and Kansas have been my most profitable teams, at least in the second half of the college football season, which is something I wouldn't have expected to say if we were doing the show like 2 months ago. But yeah, let's stick in the Big Ten. This is a Big Ten game between Washington and Oregon, and I'm on Washington plus 19.5. I played 18.5 on the look ahead, so I didn't get the best number, but I still think this is good to, I guess, 17.5, let's say. Oregon has no incentive here to win by margin. I guess their only incentive is they lost last year to Washington at Washington in Pac-12 play in a kind of a classic game, regular season game. And then they played each other in the Pac-12 championship on a Friday night in Las Vegas, and Washington upset Oregon. Oregon was like a 10-point favorite in that game. So maybe Dan Lanning's going to want to avenge those losses to Washington last season, but I think it'd be foolish to try to keep the starters in to run up the score if they are in control and winning the game. Last week, Oregon clinched a playoff spot, or not playoff spot, a Big Ten championship spot. Like basically they're in the playoff. They clinched the Big Ten championship. We actually found out about that like on a Tuesday because the Big Ten took a few days to
That was so
determine
weird.
that every tiebreaker that they could have had Oregon as one of the top 2 teams. So they announced on a Tuesday they were in the Big Ten championship game, even though they won on a Saturday at Wisconsin. Both teams were on bye last week. So next week, Oregon will have to play in Indianapolis in the Big Ten title game against likely Ohio State. It will be their 4th trip to the Midwest because they've already gone to Purdue, Michigan, and Wisconsin. I just don't see any incentive for Oregon to try to cover this number. We saw them fall short of expectations against Maryland and Wisconsin. So I already kind of feel like they're in this sense where they're just like, get in, get out, stay healthy, and focus on the bigger things ahead. And that trying to win the Big Ten championship to get a first round bye and just try to be healthy for the 12-team playoff because they're definitely one of the teams I think a lot of people think can win the national title this year. If you have a group of 3 or 4, I think that everyone would have Oregon as one of the options. So just a weird spot for Oregon. Just don't think they have any motivation to cover. And unless Lanning wants to try to get revenge from what happened last year, but it's a much different Washington team with Jed Fish. And I feel like Washington, because they are bowl eligible at 6-5. They did beat UCLA, but I do think Washington's going to want to keep it close to try to get some momentum for themselves going into 2025.
When you have one team that just kind of cares more in a rivalry game and they're getting points, I mean, that just seems like Oregon cares because it's a rivalry, but like they have a way bigger fish to fry. So they're
exactly
the mind on this game is going to be way more in the favor of Washington for a game like this.
Yeah, the other example, and I haven't personally bet this yet, but Georgia Tech playing Georgia, where Georgia basically backed in the SEC championship last week because of all the losses. They're done with SEC play. They're in the SEC championship game, and now they have to play Georgia Tech on Friday night. At least it is in Athens for them, so maybe a little bit of an easier task to just get the outright win. But there's definitely a scenario where Georgia Tech kind of just hangs around, and Georgia just tries to go through the motions, tries to stay healthy, win the game, and then they probably make the playoff if they win the game, but then they would want a first round bye. So they might be a little bit focused ahead too. So in the new era of college football, there's a lot of different new motivational and situational angles I think you have to take. And with how the conference title games work, where there's no divisions and a lot of teams have clinched a spot for next week, maybe it's worth playing against some of those teams.
Absolutely. All right. For my bonus time bet, you mentioned the head coach firing a Mack Brown. I don't have a lot of notes for this game. All I have is Mack Brown fired, and they're going to play for the coach, right? They're going to play for their guy. He's allowed to coach this game. They got rid of him, but they're like, coach out the season. It's fine. They're laying 3.5 against a really bad NC State team. Once Grayson McCall announced his retirement, everything just went downhill for the most part. At least a lot of their metrics don't look good. They had some decent performances here and there, but for the most part, if you're going against a team like UNC who's going to be motivated and who's going to have the guys, playing for their head coach, playing for Mack Brown, I will happily lay the 3.5 in a game like this, especially in a rivalry game as well. He's a good enough coach. He's a legend. He wants to go out strong. I think his players know that, and I think we're going to get that on Saturday.
Yeah, I actually had NC State written down before this news because NC State 5-6. Sure, they want to try to beat a rival to get to a bowl game, but now it's kind of like canceling each other out motivational angles. And I'm going to miss Mack Brown. That's all I'm going to say.
He was a great coach, great storyline. We know
great person,
and his players usually loved him, which was
he was beloved by his players and by bettors who liked to fade him whenever there was any expectation for them. Even when they had a future first-round NFL quarterback in Drake May and another NFL quarterback in Sam Howell. And
it was always that team where you're like, they're going to have a down year, and they win 9-10 games, and you're like, this is going to be a huge year for UNC, and they go and win 6.
Yeah, that's always what it was, or just like a big favorite. Like I remember last year they lost like Georgia Tech and Virginia, just like as 20-point favorites. Just like, how did that happen?
Mack Brown, maybe. You never know. We want to thank everyone for watching and listening and betting with us. We will maybe be back next week. We'll have to figure out how we're going to do the postseason and playoffs as well.
Yeah, I think next week we'll definitely talk about it off air, but maybe something where we just instead of going with a bonus time and a plus bus, we can just stick to 5 bets that we like for the week. Next weekend, there are 9 conference title games, so I think we can figure out 5 bets for the week, and then probably could also do something for the quarterfinals or the first round, and maybe some extra bowl bets. So then the quarterfinals going into New Year's Eve and New Year's Day.
We got some fun games coming up, so stick with us. We'll be with you every week in December that we can be. So we got more bets, more winning. But Nate, good luck to you this week. Good luck to our viewers and our listeners. And we'll be back with everyone next week.